So take a look at these three Thai Constellation Monsteras I bought at exactly the same time, all three at once. But two of them are already pushing out much bigger leaves and starting to split and give me beautiful fenestrations as well as some lovely variegation actually. But this one here, this is stuck making tiny little baby leaves. And I've also got a fourth Thai upstairs and that plant is just absolutely huge. So I know these guys can get really big. They can level up very quickly, which is exactly why this one here is just so confusing and just frustrating, to be honest. It's almost more annoying than if it was dying because it's not doing anything. It's healthy, it's growing, it just refuses to level up. Look at those baby leaves. So the question is, why are these two sizing up beautifully while this one has stalled? Well, there is one small thing holding it back, and I'll show you what to watch for and when, but get this wrong and it will stay small forever. Now, I've got to be honest, I just almost expected that the three would grow the same and the variegation and splits would show up properly on all three, right? I mean, that's the whole point of a Thai in my mind. You just want those big, massive leaves. But this one is just not budging. Now, if I'm honest, there are a couple of small things that have worked against it. Now, it is still sitting in sphagnum moss in a cup here longer than it probably should have, which can limit how confidently the roots are showing up and expanding, although I can still see plenty of room in there. So I don't quite think that's the biggest reason. And my townhouse here, my apartment, the light is not perfect. If you've seen my videos, you know I've got a low light house. So placement matters more than people realize, and I have been moving this one around quite a bit to find different spots. But technically all three of these I've been moving around because I just don't have enough space in my house. That's another video for another day. So technically that is also probably not the reason why this one is not leveling up if I've treated them the same way. Honestly, the main reason is something that I missed entirely for a long time. And it is subtle enough that a lot of people don't clock it until months later, or until maybe trying with like 7, 8 Monsteras, like me, guilty. So I think most people blame age or genetics, or like they've got a bad batch when they see the smaller leaves. But look at these three, 1, 2, 3. They've had the same start. I bought them at the same time, so they're from the same batch. But this little one here, as you can see, if you look a little bit closer, you can see some smaller aerial roots here. Now these small aerial roots have a little bit of sphagnum left over them because I wrapped some sphagnum moss around these aerial roots and I've given it this small little chopstick here for balance. But I never really gave it something properly like a moss pole. And 6 months later, it's got small leaves and frankly, the growth has just like stopped. Like it's not really doing anything right now. And this is where most people will stop. They'll just think it's a slow plant and they'll just wait, maybe wait for the next season, but probably wait too long. But on these two faster ones here, I actually was taking more notice and looking after the aerial roots a little bit more. Now, admittedly, I ignored them a little bit at first, but once the aerial roots got longer, that's when I gave these two a proper moss pole straight away. One of them is my normal moss pole here with the chicken wire and sphagnum moss. I have that for most of my plants, but I also tried experimenting here on something called the lazy moss pole. It's just a cut up water bottle, again with some sphagnum moss. And while it's a little bit more wonky, it's still a sturdy enough moss pole. So about 3 months after I gave them the moss pole for both of these plants, as you can see, the leaves have got a lot bigger than the smaller one. And the splits are coming out nicely on this latest one here because I got on the moss pole a little bit later. And this one over here has got beautiful splits on quite a few of the leaves. So here's what you need to look for. The first aerial root that shows up is almost like that plant just putting out a little feeler, trying to feel things around, seeing if everything's safe. It's looking for what's around and it might even be trying to find some friends. And then you'll find that the second aerial root will start climbing, and that is usually your sign that your Monstera is ready to climb. It knows it's safe, it can see something around, and it's ready to climb properly. So with these two faster ones, honestly, when that second root appeared, and I think I even waited for the third root, but not long after that, I added the moss poles and the leaves started getting bigger and the splits have followed. You can definitely see on here, nearly all of the older leaves have come out really beautifully fenestrated already. But this slower one here, it's only had one half decent aerial root, which is back into the sphagnum moss there. And it's given me a second root, which is actually dead now, I can just see, and the third aerial root, but they're only tiny. And this plant just hasn't committed yet. You can see these aerial roots haven't got very long, they haven't really gone anywhere, and this whole thing has just stayed really small. And that's the bit that most people don't really connect, right? They notice and they look and they wait for those bigger leaves to happen. But actually, it's not the leaves signaling, it's the roots, and more closely the aerial roots, that are telling you what's happening or what's about to happen. And then of course, don't forget the right lighting and the right type of support will definitely matter for your Monstera. But we'll talk more about those two in a few moments. So the point is, when you spot those first chunky aerial roots coming out, that's your cue. And you can actually do it from like the first and second one and see what's happening. And honestly, my big Thai Constellation upstairs, I gave that a moss pole really early as well. And now look at her, she's absolutely massive because I gave her something to climb really early on. So when those second aerial roots start forming, second and tertiary aerial roots, that's the bit that changed it for me. And honestly, I've learned this not only from my Monstera ties here, but I've had my Monstera elbow, I cut it up into 13 different cuttings, and I've learned a lot from that process as well. So I've definitely learnt this whole thing the long way. So let me show you what I'm talking about, because it's a lot easier once you understand what's going on. Okay, so I've got some beautiful healthy roots now that I've taken it out of the sphagnum moss. So now we just need to put it on a moss pole, and they are still a bit of a slow grower overall, so the moss pole doesn't need to be that huge to start with for me. So I'm going to cut this one up. Now, by the way, if you use pliers to cut up, get these. These are the most amazing scissors. I'll leave a link in the show notes for you, but they cut the wire like butter, honestly. Okay, time to put it on the moss pole. So I've got this aerial root which I'm going to try and put into the base of the moss pole, and then these will obviously go in the dirt. And then I've got this tiny one here. So I want to make sure that the moss pole is up against the end there. So this first one here I'm just going to leave, it's not going to do much, but I want to encourage this one here, if I can, to become undormant. And I'm going to put it in the best lighting, the best situation. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's just put him in. So I've tried to put that root there through the moss pole. It hasn't worked for it, but that's fine. What I'm going to do now is, because I want this second root to come out, I'm going to attach it with some Velcro, and I'm going to make sure it's pressed up against the moss pole. So as soon as that aerial root comes out, that second and third aerial root comes out, it's got somewhere to grab onto and to climb onto. It's got something sturdy. So there you go, he's now up on a moss pole, and so I've just used some Velcro tape so it's right up against the pole and it can grow into the pole, making sure I do keep that sphagnum moss damp so it's nice and soft for those aerial roots to grow into. And I did exactly this with the other two bigger ones that you saw on the table, and within 3 months, as I say, the leaves started sizing up and the splits followed really lovely. The only frustrating part with putting your Monstera up on a support is that not all supports are equal. Trust me, I got obsessed for a while there. Some look fine at first and then they'll slowly lean forward, especially if this plant gets heavier, it can lean forward very quickly. I've learned that the hard way, because some support things look perfect, but just don't support your Monstera in the right way. But more on that in a bit. And then of course, once you've given it something to climb, you have to make sure it's actually in a spot where it can grow properly. Light really especially does matter in this situation. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably in a townhouse stuffed with plants, but not nearly enough light space. My ratio is very thin right now. Honestly, every decent windowsill is claimed already, so I need to get quite deliberate where every plant grows, especially if I'm trying to fix a certain plant. And in this phase, when it's preparing to climb and actually size up, the spot that you give it really does matter in your home. So to give your variegated Thai the best possible chance, try and pop it in the Goldilocks zone. It's an east-facing window. It honestly beats a north or a south window if you can make it, because the beautiful morning sun gets directly on the leaves, but then it goes into shade when that direct sun gets too hot. So it's a really nice spot to be in for most indoor plants, to be honest. If you don't have an east-facing window, maybe try grabbing a grow light. I've got plenty in my Amazon store with the link in the description below. Mother Life lights are the ones behind me, and Barina and Sansi are amazing too, but there's so many out there. So just do a bit of diligence and find one that works for you. And especially for variegated plants, they do need good, bright light to help encourage that variegation to be as bold as it can be. If you've got a good plant, you want to give it the best amount of light to get that variegation out as much as the plant will give you. So that means if I need to shuffle plants around to give this one a better window or a better quality grow light for a while, then I will. This is the stage where I'll make sure it's in the best possible position that my space can offer it in my home. And then once it's bigger, like these guys, and a little bit more established, you can probably relax a bit more on the space in your home. But while it's trying to level up, and especially if you're restarting your plant kind of thing, then look for its best possible spot in your home. When you line them up like this, you can actually see the difference in a way in the stages. This one is obviously still in the smaller leaf phase. These two have clearly moved on. And then my big Thai, if you compare that to these three, that shows you what's happened once they're properly established and climbing well. So it's not random. There is a progression, especially if you're watching the aerial roots. And once you spot it, you start seeing them everywhere. So if you start noticing those little aerial roots forming, that's your cue. That's the moment that things can shift. And honestly, once you see it, you can't unsee it across your monsteras and philodendrons and most other vining plants, to be honest. Now, here's the thing. Giving it something to climb is only helpful if that support actually works for your plant. And I've learned that the hard way, trust me. I have been obsessed with trying to find my monsteras the right support that will help it grow really big leaves. And not all support poles are created equal, trust me. Some of them don't even hold your plant properly. They don't help your plant climb. Some of them just fall over from the weight. Honestly, I've been there with pretty much every single type. So in the next video, I'm going to be showing you which ones will actually help your leaves grow and which ones just aren't worth the effort, in my opinion. Because if you're going to help this girl level up, you honestly really want to get this part right. Anyway, that is it for today. Thank you very much for joining me on this Monstera journey. Have an amazing week, as always, full of leaves, big fenestrated, fat, chunky leaves, and lots of love and laughter. And I will see you in this next video here. See you later, guys. Bye.